think I had mentioned to you the Constitution Project before in some of my lectures. You should have heard that name before. It's an organization we worked with. They are partners with us on several, we've partnered on several occasions involving rights of Muslims in the raids in 2002, and then more recently, they were concerned about the treatment of detainees in American prisons, and so they formed the task force on detainee treatment. It was formed over 3 years ago, you would say, and during that time, it had a large budget, over $1 million, correct me if I say anything wrong. Yeah, I think it was over $1 million. And a skilled team of lawyers and investigators that traveled around the world gathering information about detainee treatment, such as Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and things like that. And the team then reported to the task force, which met regularly to discuss and assess the results. Now, you have to understand that this was being done at a time where talking about these issues was very delicate. People were concerned about it, but here you have a task force that actively went to see what happened. The task force was quite diverse. It was constituted of 11 members. Other than me, none of these members were Muslim. They were Christians and Jews, males and females, Republicans and Democrats. They included high-ranking officials with careers in the judiciary, Congress, the diplomatic service, law enforcement, and the military, you're one of them, as well as experts in law, medicine, and ethics. Yet they all willingly embarked on an important, sensitive, and perhaps highly controversial subject. They issued a consensus-based report at the end of the project, which happened last year, I believe, concluding that the United States has engaged in torture. Why on earth did such an illustrious group do such a thing? Good, upstanding citizens decided to actually criticize their government on a very basic issue and say, you have tortured. Think about your position in your country. If something goes wrong, badly wrong, are you willing to stand up and say, this is what we've done and it is wrong? Or do we engage in the notion of sitr, where you don't want to out, the scandal that is bad about somebody, or a country you love? What do you do? How do you correct? Umar ibn al-Khattab said once, if I make a mistake, straighten me out. We're not doing that. We're abdicating our responsibility because we no longer believe in a truly effective, democratic, Islamically democratic state. Okay? But in this country, people have done that. So why did they do such a thing? The answer is very simple. All members of the task force, without exception, had one important thing in common. We were all deeply patriotic and committed to this country and its constitutional values. We deeply believed that this country is a country of laws. We were concerned about disturbing information coming to light about the treatment of detainees in our custody and the possible involvement of high-level officials in the executive branch in this matter. Executive branch means not the Congress, but the White House, the State Department, Justice, etc. We were also concerned that the current administration declined, the Obama administration, as a matter of policy, to commission an official study of what happened. They didn't do it, so civil society, not the government. If the government doesn't do it, we have to do it. So the Constitution Project, under the leadership of an old friend of Karama, who is Virginia Sloan, who is the president of the Constitution Project, brought us together in an effort to safeguard our nation's charter. That was our reason for tackling this subject, because we take our Constitution and our human rights seriously. That's probably the stereotype I want to break, that all Americans don't care or all are in cahoots about this. There are people who care about the Constitution and about human rights, and seriously so, and high level. The results of this study are shocking. The most notable finding of our panel was that it is indisputable, and I'm quoting, that the United States engaged in the practice of torture. So my colleague will share with you his view and further findings and recommendations if he so chooses. And I will share with you now some stories from the report, which was 560 pages long. By the way, you might want to tell them about how effective our report was or was not. Did it have any effect? So first, let us note that there were many sites, places, where detainees endured cruel and painful punishment. We all heard about Abu Ghraib. Anybody did not hear about it? Okay. But that was only one of many. Many detainees were, we say, rendered, sent to countries known for practicing torture. Some of them were Arab and Muslim countries, okay? The belief was that if the US could not extract information from these detainees, torture in these sites would. So these countries would torture them on behalf of the US. This thesis has proven to be false, and many innocent individuals suffered from these renditions. Here's how the report describes the development, this development. Now, are you there? According to CIA officers, members of the rendition group followed a simple but standard procedure. They dressed head to toe in black, including masks. Think what ISIS is imitating these days. They blindfold and cut the clothes of their new captives. Then they gave them an enema and sleeping drugs. Okay? They outfit detainees in a diaper and jumpsuit, usually orange, for what can be a day-long trip. Their destination, either a detention facility operated by cooperative countries in the Middle East and Central Asia, including Afghanistan, or one of the CIA's own covert prisons referred to in the classified documents as black sites. While they were being shackled in a standing position for purposes of sleep deprivation, detainees were kept in diapers rather than being unshackled or allowed to use a bucket or latrine. The CIA told the Office of Legal Counsel in 2005 that releasing a detainee from shackles during sleep deprivation to urinate or defecate would interfere with the effectiveness of the sleep deprivation technique. So it's important to note that several of the rendition sites were governments with Muslim majority population, i.e. Muslim countries. One wonders, how dare these governments claim to be so Muslim when their own behavior flies directly in the face of the Quran and the prophetic hadith? According to the Bradbury memos, the longest consecutive period a detainee was deprived of sleep was 180 hours. I here mentioned the hadith. Around 1400 years ago, Khalifa Umar stated that in Medina, he would be responsible for a mule in Iraq, which stumbles because Umar did not fix the road. And now here, look what the Muslim countries are doing. The Prophet prohibited mistreatment of animals, including cats, dogs, donkeys, and birds. But in today's world, leaders of some Muslim countries have engaged in human torture, and there is no task force in the Muslim world to study their actions and take them to task. Why not? We have heard about sleep deprivation that you read about and waterboarding. So let me show you some more about waterboarding. And yeah, so the OMS, which is the Office of Medical Services guidelines, described waterboarding as by far the most traumatic of the enhanced interrogation techniques, and the only one requiring the presence of a physician as opposed to a physician's assistant. We think of waterboarding as pouring water on a person. It's not like that at all. It's much more dramatic and torturous. So much so that they required the presence of a physician. And that's a scandal in itself, that the physicians would be present at torture. And I think you probably will be picking up on that as well. It discussed serious risks based on the CIA previous experience administering the waterboarding for reasons of physical fatigue or psychological resignation. The subject may simply give up, allowing excessive filling of the airways and loss of consciousness. So they have a doctor to tell them how far can they torture this person with waterboarding before reaching the point of death. OMS stated that a series of several relatively rapid waterboarding applications is medically acceptable. Several such sessions per 24 hours have been employed without apparent medical complication. OMS recommended a careful medical assessment before more than 15 waterboard applications within a 24-hour period. Can you imagine 15 within 24 hours? And warned of cumulative effects after 3 to 5 consecutive days of intense waterboarding. So, we have also heard about hunger strikes, and we continue to hear about them. According to the report, hunger strikes had been used at Guantanamo before. Most often, they're quoting here one of the people, most often to protest allegations of guards desecrating the Quran. According to Camp Delta Standard operating procedures, MPs are instructed to avoid handling or touching the detainee's Quran whenever possible, and may only do so when security requires it under strict guidelines which include the presence of a chaplain or a Muslim interpreter. According to news reports, a Quran was kicked, withheld from detainees, and put in a toilet. Sami al-Hajj told task force staff of his first hunger strike at Guantanamo as a protest. He said, "We used it, the hunger strike, for 1 day, 2 days, when they do something bad for our holy Quran." Now we talk about forced feeding. Forced feeding is not what your mother used to do to you when you were a kid. Forced feeding was one solution to hunger strikes. Here is a story about forced feeding, something we hear a lot about but do not fully understand. I understand it because I had to be in a hospital where a procedure was done to me similar to that involving my stomach. So I know how painful it is even in the best of circumstances. Sami al-Hajj, one of the detainees who was force fed, described it as follows. They're supposed to feed you with 2 cans, small cans, but they feed us 24 cans and 24 bottles of water, continuous. And we were throwing up. It continues, and we were throwing up, and it continues. This is one feeding. It would take 8 hours like that. You are in a chair until your cell becomes full of vomit. And after that, when they come and remove the feeding tube from the esophagus, they would grab the tube and just walk away with it. Just pew. Then there was blood coming. And the guard takes it from you, the tube, and he goes to another detainee directly and inserts it without cleaning. There were also other cruel and inhumane interrogation techniques. Al-Qahtani detainee number 63 was suspected of being the intended 20th hijacker on September 11 during the attacks. In October 2002, he was interrogated with military dogs present, deprived of sleep, and placed in stress positions, all while in isolation. So let's talk about isolation. According to an FBI agent, by the end of November, Al-Qahtani was evidencing behavior consistent with extreme psychological trauma, talking to non-existent people, reportedly hearing voices, crouching in a corner of the cell covered with a sheet for hours on end. Isolation is something used in American prisons also, the regular prisons in the US, and there's a movement against them because they are a form of torture. And by the way, they also have, they give them enemas as part of the torture to get them to do some other things. A publicly released interrogation log dated from November 23, 2002 to January 11 in 2003 shows that the Qahtani treatment only became harsher. He was interrogated for approximately 20 hours a day for 7 weeks, subjected to strip searches, including some in the presence of female interrogators, forced to wear women's underwear, led around on a leash like a dog, made to bark like a dog, and subjected to cold temperatures. Al-Qahtani was also forcibly injected with large quantities of IV fluid and forced to urinate on himself and given repeated enemas. We live in a country of laws. Where do we go from here? If we do not like what we see here, we go to the ballot box in this country and vote for someone who represents our worldview, our values, and our concerns. You know, that's why President Obama was elected, because he offered a different worldview. People really hoped for change through him, and they voted for him. Some change has happened. Change does not happen immediately in a rupture like a revolution. It evolves. But the thing is that in this country, and I'm talking now to the Americans in this group, it doesn't matter how disillusioned we might be about what happened in the government and American policy. The fact is, we are in control. We are in control through the voting process. And what we see is a lot of people abdicating the responsibility to be part of the democratic process in this government and to elect and fight for our rights along the ways the Constitution allows us to do. There is a short route to that. There is a violent route to that, where you could go explode yourself or explode somebody else. And my question is, so what did you accomplish in terms of stable change? How many people did you convince that the act that you were protesting again was unfair? Or did you make them now think that you are the unfair person, you are the violent person? There are decent people in this country who are doing their job on our behalf. We should be doing the job on our own behalf also. It is time that we all embrace the rights and obligations of our citizenship and become elements of positive change and of advancement in this society. Where are the voices of Muslims who are trying to say who we really are? Why have we abdicated our voice to the ISIS voice that is going through to getting through to our children and poisoning some of them and ruining their future? Do you think that you are spectators, or do you think that the responsibility is on your shoulders as well, not only to protect the society you live in, but also to protect the world, and in particular the Ummah, from the disaster that ISIS has been dragging us into? So when we do live up to our obligations, we would then have claimed for ourselves a real life in preventing injustice. Assalamu alaikum.